Good evening, everybody. It's the Old Wolf here again for another episode of the Witch and Wolf Wisdom Podcast. Tonight's episode 40, The Endless. Some of you may know that. Some of you may not. But by the end of tonight's episode, hopefully everybody will have somewhat of an understanding. As I always like to say, take what you need, leave the rest behind. But the dynamic is one that has influenced me. It has influenced many people, and those influences came from other influences. And they are relevant to the framework of dreams. And dreams are powerful. And dreams are something that is consistent throughout history, throughout culture, throughout religion, throughout philosophy, pretty much throughout the entire human experience. So again, tonight will be The Endless. As always, thank you for coming out and joining us. We do this almost every Tuesday night. For those of you who don't know, I am the Old Wolf. I am wolf and musician and father and lover and teacher and crier, and I'm a smoker, and the running joke is I smoke and I know things. There are a lot of people within our circle, and I always like to start these off with giving them those shout outs. My philosophy again is strength in numbers. If we don't take care of each other, who the fuck's gonna do it? It's not rocket science. But in that, a couple people that we always like to kind of put in there. And with that, we'll start with my sister Suzanne and Mystical Moon. She's been a supporter many different levels. Some would call her a witch. Whoa, that word. But she is a dealer with many elements, things, crystals specifically, but not just in the, hey, here it is, you can slap it on like a bracelet or a necklace type of thing, but within the deeper elemental aspects of it. Some people are into, taking these crystals and polishing them and making them into their own things. And she's a great person to get that type of stuff. The supplies, as they say. She does a lot of different things. She does a lot of interactive giveaways, divination, metaphysical. And you can check her out either on facebook.com/mysticalmoons.live or Mystical Moons Live, excuse me. Going blind here. Or www.mysticalmoons.com. Mention myself or the witch, Lady Shiya, and get 25% off your first order. Yes, indeed. My sister, Ashley Hart, again, as always, listen, she's fucking incredible with what she does. Especially for me, and dreams are a huge part of my dynamic. Dream catchers represent many powerful elements. It represents elements of ritual, it represents elements of lore. It has symbolic dynamics, and like most things, are reflective of the creator. Okay? As a musician, I can tell you there's a big fucking difference between a handcrafted Martin and a fucking machine-pressed Hondo. It's the same analogy, okay? Real magic, real intent. So check her out, Dream Catchers with Intention, Hearts Creations. Facebook.com/Hearts-Creations, and that's Hearts, Harts. Okay? Definitely check her out. And moving right along, we have our sisters Bobby and Sherry over at Moonbeams. Again, a lot of different types of, we'll call them mystical, we'll call them magical. Some of them are just, pure stylistic. They can represent pretty much anything you can imagine. But again, in the same analogy, they actually believe in what they do. They actually care about what they do. So they take that extra effort. They actually work the magic within the dynamics of the things that they put out there to represent. So, again, you can always, go online and do that Etsy thing, but a lot of times, you don't really know who or what is behind that dynamic. And that's not to begrudge anybody trying to make a living. Everybody's entitled to it. But if you're going to spend those dollars, and again, logic suggests you want the best that you can get for your dollar. So check them out. Moonbeams, Facebook and Instagram. And again, mention the witch, Lady Shiya, or myself. Get 20% off your first order, And there's the witch out there. Yeah, she'll tell you. They have real magic. And they're not running around. Well, at least I don't think they're still running around turning, people into toads and shit. I've heard rumors. You know what I mean? Nothing that I can confirm myself. See, I don't fuck around with witches like that. I'm not stupid. My mother raised me to be smarter than that. So, there's a lot of respect within the different communities that you have to be cognizant of. And it's no different than many other, types of communities. It's the same analogy within music communities, within biker communities, artists. I mean, even within, the Beverly Hills tennis clubs. These are the dynamics that drive social human, for the most part, interactions. So check them out. And as always, last but not least, my brother, Tattoo Tony Rodriguez of Broken Past, of the Papo Sticker Company, of Under My Skin Tattoo Shop. Now, let me tell you something. Shiya just recently got a tattoo from Tony. Tony was incredibly generous at it. And she had a concept that she had been rattling around in her head for a number of years. And I've known Tony for a number of years. And, obviously, with Shiya and I being the witch and the wolf, he's come to know her. And, again, did this incredible piece. I'll let her talk about it when she's back on Wednesday, because it's her thing, but it's beautiful. You know what I mean? And it's powerful. My brother has that ability, the magic, as they say, to create an unlimited spectrum of imagery. Again, you can take a concept, make it into a shirt. You can take that same concept, make it into a coffee mug. You can make it into a tattoo. You can make it into a bumper sticker. You can make it into a wallet. The possibilities are endless. You know what I mean? And that's what he does. He translates art. He translates people's dreams, their hopes, their nightmares, their losses. He does a lot of that memorial type of stuff. And there's nothing wrong. It's a beautiful thing. When you can create symbolic elements, and our culture really, kind of hinges on remembering the dynamics of the past, the people that we love. And it is reflective of, again, part of what tonight's episode is about, the endless, and how that relates into dreams. Okay. So I'm going to play this a little bit differently tonight. And again, it was an idea that Shiya and myself kind of came up with. I used to, when we first started, do workshops, which are basically talking about my experiences, my teaching, and so forth in regards to dreams, dream walking, dream analysis, etc. And as with most things in life, a lot of different things took us in a couple different directions, and we haven't done one in a few. So we both thought it would be a good idea to use the podcast to kind of give a kind of dance into the whole spectrum. Not so much, again, in a workshop context, but with similar dynamics. So regards to this, the endless refers to a group of characters created by a guy by the name of Neil Gaiman. Now, Neil is very well known within we'll call it the comic book world, because these stories, these characters were first introduced in what is referred to as a graphic novel, which is basically a comic book, but on a much larger scale. So instead of having, 150 issues, it was a book. And it was episodic, and it followed different dynamics within these characters. And these characters are referred to as the Endless. And I'll get into more of those specifics. But to give you, again, that just kind of, okay, here it is in a nutshell. Neil took a lot of different elements, and these are basically from his own words of how he has explained it, from the different elements within not only our cultures, but within the history of our cultures. So he incorporated many different elements. Some of it was from, aspects of the Old and New Testament. Some of it was from the Quran. Some of it was from Egyptian and Greek elements. But he really used dynamics of the things that he explored, that he had learned, and that he had experienced, the commonality between religion and culture, and even science and philosophy to many degrees. And some subtle elements from authors that he was influenced by, and authors that I was also influenced by. And some of it, again, comes from a historical reference. So we're going to start the journey off there. Back in the 1650s, there was an artist, okay? And within that dynamic, okay, was created, call it a concept, an idea. This was called the Knight Street, also referred to as the Gentleman Street. So again, in the 1650s, you had a guy by the name of Antonio Pereda, okay? And, he wasn't, again, really recognized until later, but his career began early. He was orphaned at a young age, and he worked with other artists like Andres Carino, Juan Torino de Miranda, and he was a protege, okay, of Roman dynamics, architectural, and settled basically into the court of the Austrians by Philip III to decorate the pantheon of the kings of Eldon. Now, during this time period, many elements, specifically of religion, were heavily in play, okay? And much of this type of stuff was commissioned by the church. And the church, being what it was, had its own concepts and elements. But there were also other dynamics that were in play. This was a time period where certain, we'll call them heresies, were kind of crossing the spectrum. And what I mean by that, dynamics of science, dynamics of philosophy, things that challenged, okay, the dynamic of the church, of Christianity. But he used three elements and then structured it within the dynamics that were given to him. Now, the first of them is the gentleman himself. He places on the left of it, dozing in a chair, and this is the dream dynamic. And same time generating the two elements of his dream. The second is the still life, the objects that accumulate on the table. Vanity type of things, some specific symbolism, where you're, talking about elements of, metal or paper, bone, leather. And then the third dynamic is the angel, obviously, who occupies the upper part and wraps both the table and the night with his wings in a style that, again, wraps this into the story, as they say. So, to one side of the scene, you find the gentleman, And he's reclining his chairs, posture, everything. He's asleep. Rich clothes, the fashion of the time. And this is representative of the high social position. Pareda demonstrates these elements to, again, set the tone. Okay? Now, on the table, there's a cluster of objects, that, apparently do not have a specific meaning and relationship, but they actually do. And the analysis of this over the years is they're basically put into two groups: those that represent the trivialities of life and those that remember the passage of time and death. Within the first group, you have the chest full of jewels, the coins, the symbols of luxury and wealth, the cards that reflect gambling and chance, the portrait of a young woman representing blood, arms and firearms alluding to war, the scores and the violin to the music, the mass to the theater, the books and the globe to knowledge, and then the crown, the laurel, the scepter, and the mitre that symbolize power. In the second group, we find the clock that marks the passage of time. Now, the analysis really is framed around what's in the hands of the angels, a message that, again, helps us interpret the work. And the message, translated, is eternally wounds, flies swiftly, and kills. The text is accompanied by a drawing of a radiant sun on which there is a bow with an arrow ready to be launched and pointing towards the night. The text refers us to the idea of tempus fugit, that is to say, that time that evaporates. It passes quickly, leaving its consequences. Eternally it wounds, and finally it ends up bringing death. It kills. The same idea emerges from the small pictogram. The sun is our reference to measure time, and it precisely arrows that mark the hours and minutes on the clock faces. Now, art has always been something that you can make a case. It's open to interpretation. So you could take any number of these elements and point it a little bit over here or point it over there. But what we know historically, again, within the framework of the time period, this is where you really started to see, at least again within dynamics of literature, and this is really the reference of the exploration, the deeper exploration into what do dreams mean? How do they relate to all these other dynamics around us? Now, again, you can trace it all the way back. You know what I mean? There are elements of it within Egyptian culture, within Greek culture, Druidic elements, Native American, you know what I mean? And there's no common dynamic. There's nothing to say, well, that there was one particular person or event that would court. These naturally, organically grew within the dynamics. These were civilizations and cultures that were completely and absolutely fucking isolated from each other. But the commonalities, again, they're specific. You know what I mean? They're not things, at least in my humble opinion, that you can dismiss. They all reference the same types of frameworks. Some of the wording and dynamics of it change, but obviously the sun and the moon, the elements of blood, life, and death, and then the deeper, we'll call it spiritual aspects that are framed obviously from belief and from the conditioning element of the moment, of the time. You know what I mean? If you grew up within a particular place, within a particular dynamic, this is what you were exposed to, and as such, what you believe. But there started to be, as you move towards and into the Renaissance, dynamics that shifted. And again, it is obviously more captured within the dynamics of art and literature because they reflected the outside thinking. Even though this was commissioned by the church, it used the framework and the dynamics to go deeper. Now, this element, okay, starts off within Neil's interpretation of a kind of a breakdown of how things work, okay? And Dreamwalkers, again as mentioned, have been referenced in every culture, in every philosophy that we know, that we have been able to see. And there's many, many variations of it. And again, this becomes Neil's. There are dynamics within the artwork that, as mentioned, cross-reference into the dynamics of, modern Christianity, because again, much of the darker elements, as we call them, actually came out of the church. So one of Neil's deeper observations, and he frames it within the character Dream, aka the Sandman. And for those of you who can't see it, this is actually from the graphic novel, but I will read it, and it's an incredible quote, and it is powerful. He asks, ask yourselves, all of you, what power would hell have if those here imprisoned were not able to dream of heaven? Now, within Neil's lore, the endless are basically God's, the universe's creations. You have Lucifer, you have Sandman, aka Morpheus. He is the king of dreams and nightmares. Okay, he is one of the endless. And within the specific aspects of the endless, many of them were referenced within the frameworks of what is also referenced as sin, gluttony, desire, despair, sloth, envy. And they all represent the elemental essence, if you will, of that particular dynamic. And within the story, their nature, if you will, was driven by that, but also the influence within humanity and how humanity was different. And it took upon some of the themes. Granted, as with most of these types of things, he took creative license. And that's the beautiful thing about art and literature, is that it's a translation, it's a perspective. Now, you can make a case for any number of analogies, but it's the deeper dynamics that I find, and what I really try and emphasize, are important in the aspect of how our dreams are framed, what they actually represent, versus the dynamic of what we've been conditioned in many ways to believe. Now, these stories, okay, expanded out over many different variants over time. Within the first aspect, obviously, were the graphic novels. And they had a lot of really interesting characters, a lot of really incredible artwork from very gifted artists, and incredible storytelling within the dynamics of the endless and the eternal struggle between good and evil, and how there were shades within the very dynamics, that evil wasn't just evil and good wasn't just good. And that even within the dynamic of, say, a character like Lucifer, that there was hope, that there was love, that there was a context to evolve, to adapt. Granted, many of those darker elements made for you could call it the excitement of the story to draw you into it. But the narrative, again, followed very deep human elements that are reflective within our everyday lives, the choices that we make, and sometimes more importantly, the choices that we don't make. Now, this was the original first book one, The Sandman. Came out through DC Comics back in the day, and obviously it has now been made into a Netflix series. Now, again, many times, anything that gets translated from one medium to another tends to get buckled. All right? Some things they did change. Understandably, people will have their own perspective on it, but the storytelling, the dynamics of the characters, the elements that are actually, as I like to call it, the magic, they kept, which is really incredibly important, again, in saying, hey, this is something worth watching. Okay. Now, again, as with most things, context and perspective. So we'll talk a little bit about some of those characters. Death, desire, as mentioned. And there are other interesting little plays. One of the more side characters, but again, very important in the bridging of dynamics between humanity and non-humanity, was a character called Matthew the Raven, who's voiced by a guy by the name of Patton Oswalt, who's just an incredible voice actor, does a lot of animation and been, really involved in a lot of really great things. But another character, and you'll see down towards the bottom, is Johanna Constantine. Now, this was one of the changes that they made in the comics originally. And again, we'll go back to, here we go. The original character, John Constantine, was a guy. And he's come up in a whole bunch of other things, not the least of which, and probably the most known and popular, was Keanu Reeves. And it was made into a movie. And that movie was based off of these characters and off of these stories. Now, granted, again, this particular story is not the same story, but many of the elements and many of the characters are. And they're part of a large universe that Neil created and has continued to write and expand on. And that expansion, also went into the DC animated universe, where that variation of Constantine runs around fighting, the bad guys and the darker things. And again, in this dynamic, much more loosely based, but there are elements within it that have carried over. Now, there was another one that also came out, and it did have some popularity, and it ran for a while. And this was a series called Lucifer. And basically, the Lucifer Morning Star from this show is Neil Gaiman's creation. Again, they varied off of some of the storylines. They changed some dynamics. Obviously, within the lore, Lucifer had more of a kind of free-flowing sexuality, as they say. And this is something that has been, part of the lore within angels, that angels did not actually have sexuality per se. Neil took, again, a little bit different take and made it more that they had an open framework to sexuality. They did not have the human conditioning elements And they just looked at sex for what it was, pure pleasure. And it didn't matter where that pleasure was coming from. But that series, those characters were based off of that universe. So there will be, and there are, obviously, variations. And those variations, again, some people have made, elements of, questioning it. And one of those, and it's the biggest one probably in the argument, was the recasting of Lucifer as more of a feminine, a female character. And it's Gwendolyn Christie. And for those of you who are familiar with her as an actress, she was Brienne of Tarth on Game of Thrones. And she's actually a really good actress. And she does an incredibly, I think it's a very powerful job with a role that, by its very nature, you know what I mean, was going to create some controversy, was going to create some shift in the perceptional dynamic. I've seen some stuff out there that suggests, that quote unquote, they were catering to, the alternative queer crowd. Yeah, you know what? Bunch of bullshit. Neil Gaiman himself said that the characters in the comics were designed to create a framework to not play off of the dynamics of our conditioned sexuality, aka he wanted a clean slate in the dynamic within his universe and within these characters. Because, if we're going to be honest about it, sexuality, especially within the working definitions and frameworks of it, are a uniquely human dynamic. Okay? So when you step out of it, and as I like to talk about a lot of times, when you remove the emotional variable per se, and then you look at it, outside that spectrum, it actually makes sense. The dynamics within the character and within the lore, to many degrees, again, angels historically were asexual, but they were also referenced as being beautiful. And in this analogy within Christian lore and dogma, Lucifer was the fairest of them all. So again, in any crossover, there has to be certain dynamics that are translated, for lack of a better way to put it. And I think they did some really good choices in casting. Some of the characters, Cain and Abel, are referenced within the storyline as the first victim and the first predator. And again, this is biblical. This is, again, old Christian mythology that has now worked in. And then, obviously, and Shiya's talked about this, and I talk about it a lot too, a lot of the quote-unquote pagan dynamics that were co-opted, that were rewritten, in some cases overwritten, within the church's expansion and influence, stolen, as the witch says. Yes, stolen. So they are framed with it. And these frameworks are also in dynamics, again, as mentioned within the Quran, the aspects of our nightmares, the boogeymen, the monsters. They have different names and different variations, but they're all reflective of that deeper core dynamic, just as, desire, death. These are universals. They are not unique if you're a Jew versus a Muslim versus an atheist. And that, I think, in many degrees, was part of what Neil was trying to convey, but also because of his conditioning and his exposure to, elements of the church growing up, it obviously influenced it. Now, the deeper dive, as they say now, I'm going to go back to my dream walker thing because I really dig this one. It goes back to the elements of our dream. And within this mythology, within this story, within these characters, Morpheus, aka Sandman, is the king of dreams and nightmares. He is a demigod of sorts. He can create and destroy pretty much with a thought. He has some unique dynamics that we'll call them symbolic elements. His bag of sand, his ruby, his helm. And these are all explained within the initial storyline of him being trapped in the human world for 100 years, and without him to control the dream, the dreaming, as it is called, dreams and nightmares run rampant, and it affects people. And it uses some interesting historical dynamics, sleeping sickness. Well, what was that really? What happens to people when they go into a coma? So there's a whole interwoven series of storylines that are reflective of the human characters and how this one dynamic within dreams and nightmares and the chaos that ensues. One of the characters is a nightmare that doesn't want to be a nightmare, but doesn't know anything else. So he goes out and tries to be the best fucking nightmare that he can. But he recognizes the paradox of it. He has no control over it, but yet he chooses to embrace these dynamics in many ways to spite his creator. And it is a common dynamic, is a common theme within parents and children, the father and son framework, but also within the dynamics of the monsters that we create and how, in many ways, these represent some of the most important challenges and lessons in our lives. And just like anything, and again, this is something Shiya talks a lot about within the framework of what we call manifestation. We create the monsters. We create the dreams. Now, within certain aspects, and I'm going to use what influenced me, which is Native American lore. I was influenced at a young age by an author by the name of Carlos Castaneda, and he is associated and referenced a lot with the psychedelic dynamic of it. But the underlying lesson, when you just kind of remove the how we got to that level part, again, go deep into how our dreams work, how some of us can use them, can walk between them, and even control them. But that there is an endless tapestry within it that connects between past, present, and future. And those dynamics within those stories throughout the different series that Neil wrote and stuff like explores different elements. Some of it within, the classic vampire lore, or, the whole, the demons are going to come steal you, hiding under your bed, type of shit. And, again, a lot of crossing within the dynamics of aspects that exist within our world. That, hey, maybe this is what's going on. But the common theme, the reoccurring theme, goes back into dreams. And when you have a framework when you're able to look at a concept outside of the conditioning, out of the influence, if you will, of everything that we've known, it allows you to not only see more, but it allows you to experience more. Now, we know scientifically, and I've talked a lot about this, that our minds, the human mind, has many, 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 many different things going on that we just simply do not understand. But we do know the correlation to many degrees with the subconscious and some of the triggering dynamics within dreams, REM sleep, and other layers of it, sometimes referred to as lucid dreaming. It's been referenced as astral projection to some degrees. Again, there are different variations that, again, you can make a case for. But the real simple bottom line truth is that we're really just beginning to see it. We know a little bit. We know that some people remember their dreams, and other people can experience them vividly with incredible detail. We know, scientifically, that some people can, through their dreams, see other dynamics of things. And there's no other way that they would be able to know these dynamics, okay? And again, we're not talking, again, your Harry Potter type of stuff, but we're talking about things that you can't really correlate any other way. Now, Shiya does it in the framework of exploring past lives, and she taps into that dynamic in a waking state. But many people experience that in a dream state, because when we are outside of all, again, those influences that I mentioned, those distractions, our mind now is free, or freer, to focus on other things. It's a simple scientific analogy that we have X amount of resources. Your computer has a certain amount of memory. Well, your brain has a certain amount of memory. It has a certain amount of CPU, and then depending upon anything that's going on at the time, this, that, or the other thing is going to function at maybe 50%, 20%, 90%. So you have all these variables in play. But we do know, again, that sleep is an unescapable dynamic. If you don't sleep, you die. Pure and simple, okay? You die, okay? And we know the correlations with aspects within, and we'll call this the biochemical, the energy dynamics that are actually going on within the brain, different elements, different parts of the brain are actually firing. There's energy going on that, you can actually pick up and be like, oh, this is actually going on. We don't understand it all, but we know it's there. And it goes back, to like the analogy that I use a lot of times. Just because you can't see radiation doesn't mean it's not there. Just because you don't see magnetic energy doesn't mean it's not there. You know what I mean? We, as a planet, get bombarded by solar storms, every other day of the fucking week. And sometimes you'll see it, but they're outside of normal perception, just like Wi-Fi, internet. You don't see the signal. Radio stations, you don't see the musical notes dancing through the skies or through the wires, weaving their way to your car. You can't see it, but it's still there. It's still just as real. But as time progresses, this is the pattern. We learn more, and we take that knowledge and we build upon it, and they lead us to new aspects of things. I've said it many times. I'm going to say it again. What was witchcraft 200 years ago is fucking science today. But you just take that little difference. That 200 years. Now, 200 years sounds a lot. Yeah, it's more than our lifetimes. It's more than 2 lifetimes, usually. But in a cosmic sense, in a universal dynamic, 200 fucking years is zippity doodah. It is nothing. And even within the scope of the human experience, it is still a relatively small blip. And you can see the dynamics. They expand geometrically. So, you look at the Dark Ages, and then, you look at the Renaissance, and then you look at the dynamics of industrialization, and you can see the scale coming up the curve steeper as the technology bases expand, medicine, food, resource dynamics, and the cultural, social dynamics and stuff like that. It continues to build, and that geometric progression has allowed us, again, if we're really going to be honest with it, within 100 years to go from, sending mail by ponies to Star Trek level shit. And even in the dynamic from the 60s, Star Trek, to fucking today, which is my lifetime, we have jumped massively across the spectrum in the dynamics of what we know, what we can do. But, and this is the paradox, obviously logic suggests that there's a whole lot fucking more out there. A whole lot more out there going on. So dreams, again, are another dynamic with that. Hey, Judy, great to see you. Melissa, everybody, Izzy, Gary, Brother Jonathan, Jennifer. I apologize. I'm caught up in my thing, so Shiya will attest to this. I don't always pay attention to the chat, especially if I'm going off into one of my little, yes, I'm still talking about dreams. I, again, started it off about the endless, which is Neil Gaiman's, the Sandman and everything that goes along with it. But I wanted to use it again as a reference, a pop culture. Here is the truth. Art imitates life. Life imitates art. This is how it works. This is how we give voice. This is how we pass many of these dynamics. I mean, again, conditioned behavior is passed along. Just as you had a whacked out dream the other night. Yeah, well, one of the things we're going to start doing in the mentorship circle is going to be dream analysis. So that will definitely be something to bring on over into there. And I will, again, after the autism event, I will be doing more within the scope of like workshop type of stuff. I think it's an important dynamic. I believe that it's an incredible tool because ultimately, and again, in just simplifying it, I like to talk about the practical analogies. How does it really apply in our everyday lives? Well, the first and the most important dynamic is it allows us to understand ourselves, understand some of the underlying dynamics of what's going on around us, why we feel particular ways, why we react particular ways, but also more importantly, how do we adapt? Sometimes the answers are simple, and I've made this sarcastic reference, but again, if you're watching Night of the fucking Living Dead, eating ice cream and Pepsis, and then you have a nightmare about you're being chased by a bunch of fucking zombies, well, yeah, you had too much sugar and your senses were overstimulated by fucking George Romero, because that's what he does. So yeah, not hard to figure that out. But, you know what I mean? You have your everyday thing, or, use a Judy analogy, all of a sudden you get some whacked out cool world kind of dream where you got flying monkeys and, fucking Charlie Sheen shows up in a fucking tutu and you're like, what the fuck? What is this? You know what I mean? And it's difficult because this is the analogy that I was taught, and this is what I use, because again, it is a relatable tangent. In other words, it's something that people can connect the dots with. I try to explain it within our brains that, like a receiver or a computer, we have certain software, we have certain programs. So certain programs allow us to chat online or listen to music or watch movies or play games. Or we can do spectrum analysis on different carbon dating. So there's limitless amounts of things that we can do within the power of technology. Well, our brain has technology as well, too. So a lot of times it comes in distorted. Now, anybody who's used an old radio, an AM radio, you just twiddling the fucking dial, just trying to tune in to that signal. And many times that signal comes in fucked up. You can use the same analogy for the older TVs. You know what I mean? You're trying to sift through the UHF shit. And then maybe you get a signal from somewhere half around the world and it's all fucking, it's out of focus, it's got lines, it's fucking ghosty. Again, the analogy is that we're not always able to translate it. So our minds will use the tools, the imagery that we have. So sometimes that will translate as kind of, more generic imagery. A lot of times it's referenced as people without faces, without recognizable dynamics, or people that you just simply have no idea who the fuck they are. Sometimes there will be convoluted dynamics, you know what I mean? A rabbit in a fucking wolf suit, you know what I mean? They are, again, basically our mind's way of trying to make something viable, plausible, to give imagery to it, because that's how we process, for the most part, is what we see. But there are other subtle dynamics. Obviously, we use language, words, in what we hear and how we speak. But also we use the dynamics of taste and smell and what we can feel. And there's an analogy, and again, there's scientific research and study, documentation, the dynamics between when one sense is lost, how the other senses will become more heightened. This is very common, with people who are deaf or people who are blind, you know what I mean? Where one dynamic is removed, the others become stronger. And it goes back to that resource. So again, there's more power to focus into these dynamics. And that, again, will open doors to things that we normally cannot see. And more importantly, we don't understand. And Gary's like Tiger Blood mentioned Charlie Sheen. Hey, Sister Ashley, great to see you. Yeah, listen, again, the dynamics will vary, you know what I mean? And this also is very representative of dynamics like spirit guides. Depending upon what you've been exposed to, your conditioning, how you frame certain dynamics of things, spirit guides will take on that mask, if you will, because we can identify with it, okay? And when we can identify with something, we are, by default, more trusting. We are more open. We are more connected. So certain things work particular ways because they follow our natural dynamic. Now, again, that's not always the case. And, an analogy example would be trauma, the darker, more uglier experiences tend to warp and distort. And that is really the beginning of the dance into the other side of dreams, which are nightmares. And nightmares many times are reflective of those experiences again, or those traumas. But many times they can be reflective of our fears, our anxieties, our desires, even. Because, and this is one of the things that I thought was really powerful within Neil's work, how these elements can warp. Something can be in a framework good, if you will, love, but it can become warped and ugly and dark. And out of darkness, anger can be born hope. Okay? So, context, and this is part of the paradox element. Context really depends on the details, the situation, the person, and it changes all the time. Now, granted, certain things again have common elements to them. Pain is pain, love, fear, desire, despair. The symptomatic elements will vary again from situation to situation, person to person, but that underlying core is still the same. But out of those dynamics, again, can be born shift, if you will, into the good, the white, the light. And that process sometimes really requires us to, again, to step outside the box of how we have been conditioned, how we've been taught. We become comfortable, we become used to it. You hear the same story 1,000 times over, and eventually the story is real within the variation, again, of your own perception. But that perception now sets the stage, if you will, for everything else. So if you're looking at it, and especially if you're looking for it, we tend to see what we want to see. And the trick again becomes, what do we need to see? There's a lot of debate regarding the obvious pitfalls and dangers within these darker dynamics, the nightmare end of the spectrum, if you will. I believe, again, as with most things, you have to look at it on a case-by-case basis. There is a good case to be made, a strong case to be made. That whereas, yes, there's a lot of this in, pop culture and literature, and you can trace it from here to there, and, you got the Sandman, this, that, everything, blah, blah, blah. But the practical reality is that it is not something that you should do if you don't know what you're doing. Like, I encourage everybody, hey, you want to go out and you want to go surfing? Cool, go learn how to surf. But also make sure you know how to fucking swim. Make sure you understand the dynamics, the dangers of the environment that you are now going into. Same analogy for people who go hiking, who go, mountain climbing, any number of the analogies, that there is always the flip side of the coin. And exploring dreams is no different. In many ways, it's actually more problematic because the normal rules don't apply, okay? Physics does not apply within dreams, okay? The laws of nature do not apply in dreams, okay? It is, by its very nature, chaotic, but completely open-ended. Now, again, there are many different levels, and, I could spend hours, and I will spend hours over the winter, getting deeper into what is referred to, and how I refer to as the different circles, you know what I mean, within the aspects. You have, obviously, our personal, our internal elements that are reflective of us, be it emotional, be it whatever. You have the circle that is the world, everybody else, the people around us. Okay. And then you have a greater circle, which is more of a universal dynamic. It represents the framework of the past, the present, and the future. And there are other circles. I will be honest, I have knowledge of 3 of the circles. There can be, and depending upon who you talk to and what you read, as many as 5 to 7 circles. One of the dynamics for me, and some of it is conditioning, is aspects that are outside of humanity. I have spoken to people who legitimately have experienced dynamics that are not within the human equation. And that's not to open the door into the whole, is there life out there, X-Files, ding-a-ling type of thing. Personally, for anybody who actually wants to fucking know, I think it's absolute insanity to think that somehow that we are the only sentient creatures in the fucking universe. Okay? It just doesn't make any sense with everything that we know. It just doesn't. And I'm not presuming to say that I know what the fuck it is. I don't. I just believe that there's more out there and we just can't see it for whatever reasons. And again, if you just look at what we do know, billions of galaxies with, billions of star systems within the, you know what I mean? It's, the numbers are absolutely ridiculous, and let's really think about it. If you're going to think about it in the terms, and let's just call it a cosmic garden, okay? The type of shit that you're growing in this garden by default, you really got to grow it way away from each other, because you don't want one, necessarily fucking up the other. You know what I mean? So, from a pure cosmic kind of balance type of thing, yeah, it makes sense that we're fucking scattered to and fro, because, let's be honest about it. Again, if you look at us as a species, you know what I mean? We are, fucking unbelievably destructive. You know what I mean? So, if we were to be like, hey, there's life on Mars, the first thing we would probably do is nuke Mars. Okay? Too many people have seen War of the Worlds. You know what I mean? Too many fucking comic books and horror stories and science fiction, this, that, and the other thing. I don't see any reality that, life on Mars would be anything more than apocalyptic to the human condition as it stands right now. Okay? We can't get along with ourselves. Okay? So, again, we're going to have an honest conversation. If we can't deal within the variations within our own people, there is no way that anything else outside the box. And people talk, well, why haven't they shown themselves? Because they're probably scared shitless. Or they've reached a point where they recognize that, we just got to let them do their fucking thing, because it doesn't matter what we say or do. Now, if you use the Star Trek analogy, the whole prime directive is that you don't want to interfere. You don't want to force a dynamic by introducing variables that do not belong. And, again, I think it's a noble argument. It has a lot of weight to it. However, I'm a context guy. I don't believe in the no-win scenario, okay? I just don't. Everything has unique aspects to it. And when you factor those unique dynamics, there is an infinite amount of possibilities, So, you use, again, a storyline where, is it better to let a civilization be wiped out because they don't have the ability or technology to stop an asteroid, or do we casually, take out said asteroid and give them a chance? Now, granted, the prime directive within the Star Trek universe would allow that as long as you didn't expose them to the technology. But what if you had to? And again, that was the premise of one of the Star Trek, beginning of the Star Trek movies, from the reboot, Star Trek Into Darkness, is that basically Spock and them just beamed them into a fucking volcano to shut it down so it didn't fucking destroy the indigenous people. And they saw them, and they saw the ship. Again, lesser of two evils, I feel it. I identify with Kirk. I get the Spock thing because I'm a student of logic. But when you're talking about lives, when you're talking about the practical context of a reality, especially other people's realities, sometimes it really is the lesser of the two evils. So, yeah, sometimes the prime directive isn't going to hold. Now, we digress. We go outside the box. But in many ways, they are connected because much of this is the, again, translation of our dreams. Authors write stories and characters, and many times they come from our dreams. They come from our subconscious. Dreams are, again, another word that has very specific stereotypical elements attached to it. You're asleep, and they're this or they're that. But they have many variations. Lucid dreaming, people do, within their waking dynamics, experience it. And there's a case to be made, again, because we are limited in our perceptions, and we're conditioned as well within them, that we do not see the difference. We do not understand where those separations actually lie. So there is a case to be made, I believe, within what we understand of how the mind works, that sometimes that process is actually going on, but we're not actually sleeping. Some people refer to it as deja vu. Some people just, it's that psychic thing. You get that vibe, you get that read. And they're tied together because they are, again, ultimately channeled through us. We are the wand, if you will. We can use other dynamics to help us, but ultimately we are the source. We're the core dynamic. We're tapping in to these things. We're learning to fly. We're learning to dance. We are exploring. Sometimes we're fucking stumbling about. And sometimes we're dragged, kicking and screaming, into an element for no other reason because wrong place, wrong time. So the chaotic aspect of it is a hard pill to swallow. You know what I mean? Especially when you're trying to hold it up against the things that are tangible, the stuff that you can touch, the stuff that you, I can smell that. You know what I mean? They have more weight. They're more tangible to us, and as such, they have more impact upon us. So we're going to take a break for a minute. I'm going to do one of the tracks, and again, this track for me was written within some of that aspect, within not only the dynamic of that conditioning, but how they created in some way the nightmares. Okay, this is the darker end of it. But Demons was a deep reflection for me of that, for one of those elements, where it came from and then how it became, how it now translated and influenced, and in many ways evolved into other things. It corrupted other aspects of things. And within the visuals, the video that I did with my son, they were also reflective of some of his perceptions, what was relatable to him within the anime aspects that we chose to use to help tell the story. But again, this is my nightmare, as they will, and it's not always bad to explore our nightmare. Sometimes that's really where the truest and best healing occurs. So, enjoy Demon for a couple of minutes, and then we'll be back and we'll continue the conversation. And I'd like to open it up. So, if anybody has anybody who's actually still sticking around, wants to talk about a dynamic within their dreams or their experiences and stuff, we'll spend the rest of the evening talking about that or any questions that you have. So enjoy Demons, and we'll be back in about 5 minutes or so. Yeah, that was demons. That was my little translation nightmare, if you will, shadow work. But it was a reflective dynamic within many of the elements that I mentioned earlier. The conditioning of religious dogma, the whole, you know, eternal fire, demons, damnation, the unwavering prism of light versus dark. And the simple reality is, and this is not to take away from faith and anybody's choice in that, but it's obvious, I think, for what it is. It is control mechanism. These elements did not really come into play, at least within Christian mythology and scripture, until much, 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 much deeper down the road. It was church driven. And, you know, we know just from history and the general human experience that fear is something that people have and probably always will use to control, to manipulate. And there it is. Without, we'll call it the counterbalance. There's nothing to fear. Why should I listen? So you had to have a framework of damnation. You had to have a framework of despair, the eternal fire, suffering, punishment in on a scale beyond anything that really could frame with human experience. How do you really translate burning in a pit of fire for all of eternity? You know what I mean? And hell, the ultimate nightmare, has really been depicted in many different ways. You look at Dante's Inferno, you look at Gaiman's translation, and some of the dynamics of obviously literal and the cultural dynamic. You know, hell has been referenced as, you know, the denial of everything that is good, the burning pit analogy, the being lost within your own guilt and remorse dynamic, or simply and ironically, this. It has been referenced and has been referred to. Granted, not within any real mainstream aspect, but it has been a counterpoint as well since the beginning that this is hell. This is really the dynamic, the suffering, the endless chaotic elements. And as mentioned earlier, and you know what I mean, it is, I believe, the important dynamic. What power would hell have if those here in prison were not able to dream of heaven? So how could you appreciate the pain if you didn't have a little good now and then to balance it all out? Because conditioning suggests within the human equation that if it was all just blah, eventually it wouldn't make an impact. And that is really, if you want to truly explore it, the deeper suffering, the real agony, the real damnation aspect is being forced to, not unlike a twisted Groundhog Day, to have to live forever within that dynamic. And it is unpleasant, I think, to say the least, to really think about it. You know, me personally, I'd rather, I'd rather embrace the the void thing that, hey, that is it. Just, oh, nothing. Game over. Surely not down on this, insane framework that, if you ate meat on Friday, somehow you're going to spend eternity burning. Yeah, it doesn't jive, doesn't make sense. But what does make sense within the scope of our reality, and you could call it karma, that depending upon how we live, in many ways, might reflect what comes after in those subtle dynamics, but obviously within the greater ones. I'd like to believe that there's a special hell for the Hitlers and the Idi Amins. And Shiya makes a great point. For all the dead that she's talked to, not one has seen hell. Now, is that because it doesn't exist, or is it because it's really beyond our understanding? Or, again, is this here hell? And does that necessarily make hell all that horrible? Again, when you had the introduction within Christian lore of purgatory, which suggests that there's there's this in-between place where you only got to suffer for this amount of time, and you got to work through your shit, and then, get all cleansed, and, we get you good, and we get you, fucking queer guy for the Christian guy thing, and get you back out there, and then it's off to the good shit. Which again just kind of says, well, this sounds like somebody moving the fucking goalposts and realizing that, hey, we've created a dynamic that just might be just a little bit too fucked up. So let's create a middle ground, because we don't want to scare everybody the fuck away. We got to keep those donations coming in. We need them coming in here on Sundays. I hate to say it, but it's not dissimilar from a lot of things that have happened historically within many other cultures, within religious dogmatic frameworks. Again, I'm not trying to take away from the spirituality, because I believe the spirituality is important. Just again, because I don't understand it doesn't make it any less real. I just believe that most of what's put out there as truth, it's just somebody else's perspective on it. But a lot of times it's bullshit. It's bullshit specifically designed to manipulate, to control, to mislead. So, again, take what you need, leave the rest behind. But there are many different takes on it. Again, you look at Native American aspects, and they believe that dreams, again, are another layer of the world. And those that can walk within it, again, depending upon how you choose to apply it, can walk within the good or can walk within the bad. But more times than not, have to dance between both. Again, and I'll use the analogy from their culture, if another tribe's going to come in and going to kill everybody and rape the women and all that really ugly shit, well, you're going to have to dance to some degrees within that darker element. You're going to have to set a war party. Your warriors are going to have to go out there and they're going to have to fight. Within Christian lore, angels were the soldiers of God. Okay? They were not philosophers. They were not poets. They were warriors. They were soldiers sent to enforce God's will. Now, the greater irony, and this is something that Gaiman talks a lot about, and within those characters, specifically within Lucifer Morningstar, is that maybe within the framework, that perceptional dynamic, maybe Lucifer's not actually the bad guy. Maybe he looked at God and said, this is fucked up. Why are we standing here watching these people suffer? Why do I have to go down and dip my wing in blood? Why are we doing this? How is this? And within many aspects of it, it was, and it's been translated one of two ways, that, that it was arrogance, that Lucifer didn't want to have to be lowered, quote unquote, underneath man, that somehow man was put above the angels, the host. But I think more importantly, and this is the reference I've seen within, specifically within pagan occult variations on that, which is basically Lucifer is like, no, I don't want to do this anymore, and I choose a different path. And, again, history, many, many references as to what happens to gods who side with man. You know what I mean? You look at Hercules, you look at, Prometheus, you see many, 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 many references throughout various cultures and time periods and stuff like that of the more human connection, that dynamic. And there's a case to be made within the perception element that certain things have to carry particular imagery. So, the fallen angel versus the beast. You know what I mean? The good, the bad, the ugly. You know what I mean? The anti-hero versus, Father Flanagan, who looks like he's a great old priest. But he's actually the fucking Antichrist. Again, perception, context. You can take these things. And again, not saying that I know it. But does it really threaten anything to at least explore it? To try and understand how we ended up where we are with certain things. And these dynamics, they're reflective within us. That's where music, that's where literature, art, all of it comes from. It comes from our perceptions, our experiences, and how they are translated. And a lot of those are formed, again, within the framework of our dreams and our nightmares. Dreams are used as a reference. You want to go out there, you want to work hard so you can achieve your dreams. These are the things I want. I dream about a 71 Barracuda. All original. It's a dream I have. But I can make that dream real. All I need is a little bit of patience, a little bit of research, and a good chunk of fucking money. But it's a very achievable dream. But is that really a dream? Or is that just a convenient label that we throw on dynamics? Well, we want this, so it's our dream. You dream about different things. And I'll use the sexual dynamic because it's an easy, cheap go-to. Jess, thank you. She beat me to it. You want to have your own clothes? Well, lingerie company. That's great to dream of it. But here it is. We dream about dynamics. Sometimes we dream about the things that we want to do, but we can't do, or that we feel we shouldn't do. And they're referred to sometimes as wet dreams, erotic dreams. But many times these are just translations of internal dialogue. So we live them out. We play them out within our subconscious. There's another type of dream. But is it really a dream in the same analogy? It's just wanting her own clothes company? Probably not. But again, easily achievable within certain dynamics. Granted, again, depending upon who you are and where you are in the food chain. It may cost you money and it may not. But again, this is just really a snapshot. Hey, take a look at it over here, or we'll take a look at it over there. But it is still an interpretation of those emotional dynamics. Desire, which again was one of the ends. So how does that hinge against something like death? And death, I think, is a great one and an easy one to really go to, because death is always personified as, the hooded, skeletal, you know what I mean, walking around with the scythe, your time has come, I have come for your soul. You know what I mean? Really deep, dark. Oh, fuck, death, everybody shits himself. Death is here. But Kamen actually portrayed death as a loving, generous, almost motherly character. And the interpretation with it was just really, Death's job was to make it easier, to give them support, to give them solace in making the shift, crossing the bridge between what they've known and what now is and shall be. And death wasn't this horrible figure. Now, granted, death had a time period, and it was jokingly referenced about, well, it's not the same as it was back in the Black Plague. Death evolved. Death recognized and connected within the framework of human emotions, love, compassion, but fear and despair. And really, again, is portrayed as an incredibly beautiful character, not the terrifying, hooded, monstrosity that is, again, the stereotype of how. And, I talked about this a lot, and again, Shiya's talked about it, even within the Tarot. Death is one of the most commonly misunderstood, misrepresented within the Tarot, with the devil. Because, again, we have these conditionings, we have these perceptions. Oh, even in this imagery, this is your classic devil. You know what I mean? Got the little horns, dark figure, you see the eyes there, the fucking wings, just looking like some bat out of fucking hell. No pun intended. So we relate to these things. These things have been established, again, have been passed on through generations, have been framed within art, framed within literature, framed within music. You want to listen, try out some death metal. You know what I mean? Some of that shit it's just off the wall. Me personally, not a huge fan of it, but back in the day, I was a Merciful Fate fan. I could relate to that deeper, darker kind of what the fuck is wrong, and a lot of it at the time for me was just a translation of rage, was a translation of uncertainty. And it just says death means a lot. You die to live again. Yeah, it's perceptional. It's how you choose to look at it. And again, the witch, Shiya, makes a great point. As humans, we are fascinated with death. It's the unknowable. It is that great big question mark of, why are we here? What's it all really about? Where do we go? What do we do? And, there, again, all types of interpretations, but interestingly enough, and I've spoken to other people that have shared a very similar dynamic that Shiya shared, I have yet to actually meet anybody that's actually seen hell. And I've met a few people over the years that have quite literally danced with death, who have, as Shiya does, are able to commune with those who have passed. So, just basic math suggests that, well, somebody would have translated this over. What's more probably real is that we created it, that it really isn't what we think it is. And because it has been used so much and it has been conditioned so deeply, that's how we perceive it. So that's where the dynamic in many ways has to shift. We have to stop thinking in that context. Stop using certain analogies. It's like witches. Witches have now again been relegated to the whole pointy nose with the hat and the warts and the, fucking ugly. Yeah, no. No. Priestesses, listen, let me tell you, the best sex you're ever going to have is with a fucking witch. Okay? Pure and simple. Okay? There it is. Okay?
I'd do it.
No, these are, again, stereotypes. They're conditioned dynamics. Granted, yes, there were some witches that were probably fucking horrible. Okay? Toward the later years, my great-grandmother, she looked like a goddamn witch, but she was like 90-something fucking years old. You know what I mean? Once you talk to her, and once you actually got past that one-dimensional aspect of what we see initially, visually, the energy that the woman carried was incredible. Okay? It wasn't ugly, it wasn't evil, it wasn't dark. She was just an old woman who time had really not been kind to. Guess what? That's what happens to probably 99% of us. Very rarely do we get to really, especially once you get into those deeper ages, that there isn't going to be a physical dynamic that's just like, wow, that's fucking old. It is what it is. But does it actually represent the internal, the actual energy, the person? You know what I mean? Again, I've spoken about this a lot, and it really goes back to it. These dynamics of how we're supposed to look, what looks good versus what looks bad, what looks good versus what looks evil, what looks good versus what's not attractive, you know what I mean? There's so many variations on the theme, but they're all illusions. They're basically somebody else's perception. Well, because I see it this way, you should look at it this way. Why? We don't have to. That is part of the story. Again, the one of the driving elements within the Sandman lore, within the stories, is that we don't have to. We can choose. It's the beauty of free will to perceive things differently, to look at things and people differently, to throw out these old, worthless, in my humble opinion, dynamics, okay? And again, I put that note with spirituality is different, okay? Dogma, the stereotyping, the conditional element, especially when they are driven by obvious fuckeries, okay? No way around it, okay? The two do not go hand in hand. And you replace it now with something a little bit more, shall we say, human. Now that, again, opens that ugly little door into, well, man is not God. Of course not, we're not God. It's not what it's about. But obviously we've been given certain tools. We've been given gifts, if you will. And if we're going to take at least even a little bit from the dynamic, obviously we've been given the ability to make choices. Every day we make choices. So if we can make choices about this, that, and the other thing, why wouldn't that apply across the board? Why would it be you're only allowed to make choices over here, but on this side of the room, no, you don't get to make a choice. This is what it is. No. The more, rephrase it, the more logical dynamic suggests that it is open-ended, that we make of it, we create the demons, we create the gods, we put faces on these things because we don't know what else to do. And the human mind as such, we strive, we struggle, we fight to define things. We want to understand. We need to understand. And yeah, Shiya says it very well. We are all spiritual beings living a human experience. But what is human? That is defined as well, too. One place, one time, this is human. Another place, another time. That doesn't appear fucking human to me. You know, and again, you can use the analogy, and I've seen this, and I believe in this context, the horrors that we physically manifest. You know, napalming villages, okay, shooting people down in the street like they're dogs, watching children starve around us. These are nightmares made real. These are literal manifestations of apathy, greed, despair, sloth, the endless, your deadly sins, whatever, again, particular little wrapper you want to throw on it, it's still the same thing underneath, but just again, framed differently, different perspective, different analogy, different words. But as I'm fond of saying, and as the monkey likes to say, all these squares make a circle. Therein lies the paradox. So where do you draw the line? And I think that's within the collective. That is within the dynamic. You know, again, most of us, I would say 99.9% of us can agree that fucking 8-year-old children is not acceptable. It's just not. For most of us, that is a nightmare. It's an ugly nightmare. But what about the demented, warped scumbag that's their dream? See, that doesn't frame within the collective. It needs to, and I believe rightly so, to be removed, to be cut out of the collective, because it is, by its very nature, a threat to the collective. That dynamic requires the victim. And by its very nature and definition, a victim loses the free will, loses the choice. It is removed. And that aspect plays out every day across the world. And it has since the beginning of time, and unfortunately going to continue for a long time to come. But within that dark, ugly element lies, at least, again, a piece of hope, of strength, in that if we can identify that, if we can recognize it, and then more importantly, if we can accept that as a collective, we now have the framework of the strength of numbers to actually make things different, to change the dynamic, to, again, manifest the things that we would frame as our dreams versus letting our nightmares run wild around us. Because again, each one of us is manifesting. Each one of us is tied into the network, if you will, within all these channels of energy, past, present, future. Again, some people dismiss it and are completely unaware of it. And some people are full on tilt deep into it. And then within those endless variations, you have some on one side of the coin who will and do try and live. Their actions are based within the good, the white, the light. And then there are obviously those that are not. And they are the murders and the rapes and the travesties and the tragedies and the traumas and all the horrible fucked up things that go along with it. But they are dreams and they are nightmares. A dream to some, a nightmare to others. But within that collective, especially within a collective understanding, when you can find that commonality, that's where the dynamics really change. And, the most obvious examples of that are within the framework of technology. How using that model, things are built upon. You start off with your deep, big vinyl records, and then tape, and then you have 8-track, and then you have cassette, and all of a sudden you have CDs, and DVDs, and Blu-ray, and now you have Wi-Fi. These elements were built upon the layers of what came before it. It is a collective endeavor where this is taken over here and expanded, reverse engineered, if you will, however, again, you want to frame it. But the end result is, again, that geometric progression of building upon that which has come before. It is no different within the spectrum of our lore, within the aspects of our literature, and then by default, obviously, carries over into everything else. Art imitates life. Life imitates art. And many times, I would say for the most part, they are reflective of this ongoing dynamic. Our dreams, our nightmares, and everything that lies in between. Now, some of this, like I said, for me was influenced at a young age by certain dynamics. The things that I read, the things that I was taught. But this is the beautiful thing about the here and now. Information is more readily available than at any other point in human history. There is so much out there. There's so much now that we can, again, as a collective, explore, share, and really, again, I believe, and my hope, begin to find that commonality again. Instead of being distracted by fucking stupid shit like fucking the political insanity or these insane, social spin. You know what I mean? It should be a simple dynamic. You know what I mean? We don't have to agree, but you know what I mean? Everybody should have that right within the baseline to live their life. Nobody wants to be told that, hey, you got to do this with your body. Nobody wants to be told, hey, you have to do this because of that. Some stuff we accept. We aren't particularly crazy about it. I don't like paying taxes, but I do because I understand that that's how we have roads and bridges and shit like that. So, again, we don't have to always agree on everything, but that commonality is really meant to be for the greater good. Now, again, you can obviously, again, and semantics, by its definition, says, yeah, you can fucking poke a hole in any type of dynamic, see what you want to see, create that alternate reality dynamic, because, again, that's the other side of the coin within manifestation. Well, hey, if I'm going to manifest, my reality, it's going to be my reality. And I don't give a shit about you or anything else or anything. Well, the problem with that is, when you got, billions of people all running around with their own reality, that's the very definition of fucking chaos. So, ironically, again, doesn't seem to really work out too well. It's never worked out for any other civilization before us. Not sure why it would be any different. If anything, we just got bigger and better tools to fuck ourselves up with. But their dynamic, again, play out. And really, I think, you want to give it what I call perspective. All you got to do is just, step outside on any given night and look up into the sky. You know what I mean? You got a moon swinging around, you got planets and fucking sun, and, all these things are going to do whatever the fuck they do, and we have zippity-doo-dah as far as control. So the sun, as it's in the peak of its solar activity within its, I think it's an 11-year cycle, it's just basically been spitting fucking shit at us for the past month or two. All it takes is that one particular time that, the sun pumps out a little bit extra and we're fucking toast. All the debate, all the fucking rhetoric, out the window. It's terrifying, yes. But it's also humbling when you can, again, step back and be like, you know what? There's a whole lot of other shit in play that's so beyond us that it should, and it will, if you allow yourself to really feel it, to experience it. Kind of, pull yourself back from it. We are not the center of the universe. We're part of it, but we also have to be practical in the dynamics, and again, nightmares become reality. And not just by doing bad things, evil things, dark things. Oh, I don't recycle. I'm killing the planet. No, it's the apathy. It's the dismissal, the semantics, the avoidance, the, not my problem, or, Tooth Fairy Santa Claus is all about, doesn't matter what face, what name you put on it. There's shit in play that's beyond us. And it doesn't give a fuck about all this other stupid stuff. And again, I think it's just probably fitting to use the dynamic of death. Death doesn't give a fuck if you're Christian or Jew. Death doesn't give a fuck if you're rich or poor. Doesn't care if you're gay or straight. If you identify as a furry, or if you spend your days licking beaver asshole, or playing mahjong, or whatever it is. Death doesn't. We know this. We know this not only instinctively, but, in any fucking graveyard, in any fucking city, in any given fucking country, our world is littered with our dead. And absolute folly to believe that, somehow I'm fucking unique. Death comes. Death comes for the young, comes from the old, comes for the good, comes for the bad. It is part of the endless. So I hope that it gives some people a little bit of insight, for those of you who stuck through it. definitely check it out. Listen, a couple different ways you can explore this lore. There's a lot of really good stuff. If you're into like the DC animated stuff, yeah, the Constantine stuff. It's got some really interesting, storyline lore stuff. If you're into the deeper Hollywood experience, Keanu Reeves, Constantine, great movie, really wild, gives you again a really different perspective take on the whole good evil dance type of thing. Highly recommend Neil Gaiman's graphic novels. Incredible storytelling, beautiful artwork, great characters, and Lucifer's not bad. But I would definitely say, if you've never watched Lucifer, and if you have Netflix, watch The Sandman. Watch that first, okay? Because that is true to the author. Much, much truer to the author. And I'm just one of those people. I believe that, the core of a dynamic needs to stay true to the writer. You know what I mean? It's like somebody trying to play Stairway to Heaven on a jug rack. You know what I mean? It's not the same thing. I'm sorry. Okay? If that's your thing, you want to go out there and clank some spoon together and pretend that it's Stairway to Heaven. Yeah, fine. You can identify as a fucking dingo as well, too, for all I care. It's your fucking reality. Have at it. But it's not the same thing. It just isn't. So take what you need, leave the rest behind. But again, if you have the opportunity, explore it. It's great storytelling, really good casting. You know what I mean? An enjoyable experience, and it may just give you a different perspective, show you a different page within the infinite book of the universe. Explore the proverbial book of shadows. Because not all of it is what we've been led to believe. Now again, full disclaimer, don't go out there and start sacrificing shit trying to pull demons, okay? Demons don't play nice. They will fuck you up, okay? And demons run the gambit of spectrums, okay? It isn't, again, Harry Potter type of shit, okay? If you don't know what the fuck you're doing, don't fuck around with it. But that doesn't mean that you can't learn, that you can't explore within reason. It's the same analogy. You don't jump out of a plane without a fucking parachute. We don't have wings, we don't fly, okay? Use common sense. That's another one of the beautiful tools we have. We have the ability to process, to analyze. Be like, yo, that looks like some fucked up shit, man. Let's just not do that. You know what I mean? And it's no different than, hey, don't stick your finger in that fucking light socket, you fucking moron. Or the old Bugs Bunny cartoon. Ah, would you throw a lit match in here? Oh, yeah, throw the lit match in there, Rocky. It's insanity, right? Yeah. Doesn't mean you can't explore. Just don't go fucking ghost hunter-y. You know what I mean? Don't go out into some, fucked up, closed down asylum and start doing that supernatural shit, laying down runes and killing cats and, oh, hell, Satan. You know what I mean? Because guess what? Here's the reality. If you're wrong, okay, you're going to end up a fucking meat puppet, okay? And it's not going to be fun. And it may be the literal translation of hell. You know what I mean? Who knows? But really, is that, I don't know about you. It doesn't sound like a good time to me. You know what I mean? But, hey, if that's your dream, sometimes the only way we learn is, to find out the hard way. Hopefully it won't be the hard way for you. But as always, thank you again for taking the time to listen to my endless insanity, my ranting. But I hope, again, in all seriousness, that, maybe it touched a nerve, planted a seed, made you laugh. But until next time, know that you are loved, and if you can't be with the one you love the one you're with. I'm going to close it out with my brother Jonathan and I's track, Time of the Phoenix, kind of that, we can all change. We can all be reborn. Doesn't matter. Despite everything that gets thrown at us, despite all the horrors and nightmares and stuff like that, there is always the beautiful fucking promise of the dawn of that new day, the new hope, and the endless possibilities with it. Have a great night, everybody. Till next time. Enjoy Time of the Phoenix. Oh, and before I forget, I almost did. Okay. Yes. September 17, 2022. Under My Skin for Life for an Let's try that again. The Under My Skin for Life Foundation presents the Arts for Autism event, September 17th, 2022, in Port Monmouth, New Jersey, a.k.a. the Jersey Shore. There's going to be a bike run before. There's going to be wrestling. There's going to be music. It's going to be the 501st Star Wars guys are going to be there. Jose Hernandez Jr., Spawn Ranch, Blue Red Roses, Broken Past, My Pocket Full of Wolves. There's going to be ice cream. There's going to be food. There's going to be all kinds of shit. It's going to be a blast. We got people coming out. You want to be a part and hang out? Let us know. We'd love to have everybody come out there. But again, the Rat. That's right. It's going to be a rock and roll show. Woohoo! That's right. We're going to channel some shit. We're going to work some fucking magic, man. But I hope to see you all out there. And until next time, have a great night and enjoy the Time of the Phoenix.
I never regretted. to die. Days go by, years go by.